As can be easily discovered through perusing YouTube, the anarcho-capitalist mentality is most vocally predicated on the non-aggression principle, which implicates government as being necessarily immoral due to their ability to collect taxes, through its use of monopolized force or violence, defined as initiating violence. But what is tacitly being called for in the advocacy of a private legislature and judiciary, where law is subjected to competitive forces, i.e., the voluntary choices made by society as to what form of law they wish to respect, determines the success or failure of a private law, is the repeal of law enforcement as a monopolistic enterprise in society, viz., the means to maintain law as a service, which necessitates the use of violence, turns into a commodity. Irrespective of a sanguine judgment on the outcome of such a competition, which possibly would lead to the monopolization of law anyway, as suggested by Robert Nozick in Anarchy, State, and Utopia, it is argued here that anarcho-capitalists have an infantile perspective of the decency of human beings, unsurprisingly diametric to leftism's justifications for government force, yet ironically similar in infantilism, viz., that such private judiciaries, and by extension humans, are perfect moral agents, and that the idea of, quote, the non-aggression principle will be held as a virtue and will guide human choice. Yet through commoditizing violence, anarcho-capitalists have a massively internal contradiction. Initiating violence actually becomes incentivized. The simplest evidence to falsify such a belief that the removal of monopolized force will lead to virtue is one which no doubt many anarcho-capitalists are familiar with: the illegal drug trade. By keeping drugs illegal, competition is restricted, which drives profits down. Other way, which drives profits upwards and enables great wealth to be accrued. Freudian slip there. This wealth, built through the exclusion of monopolized force, necessitates force as an operational cost of the drug business. The business needs to protect its interests in the absence of the monopoly. In doing so, violence is an integral form of the business. It is no wonder then that through the act of competing drug businesses, violence is used so frequently. It behooves drug business A to outcompete drug business B, so shortening the latter's product supply through the use of violence is a legitimate business expense for the former to increase its profits. It is argued that this is already accomplished through the use of the government, and hence the aim of reducing the scope of government by laissez-faire advocates, for instance. It can be said then that the black market is actually an anarcho-capitalist market. The skeptic will argue it is fallacious to conflate private business with private law. Regardless of evidence of anarcho-capitalist enterprises, i.e. drug cartels, that's rubbing salt in the wound, isn't it? Providing law in parts of Mexico and Colombia, as well as the infiltration of these enterprises in governments, in such countries as Mexico and Colombia, or the mafia, for instance, in Sicily. Violent competition would take place amongst private judiciaries and legislatures by de facto of competing law enforcements. On the other hand, the skeptic will argue that presuming the existence of competing private laws is begging the question: why do laws even need to exist? Yet determining rational action is predicated on the ability to predict outcomes in an environment where actions are not arbitrary, i.e., human actions are not future. The outcomes of human actions are not determined on a whim, for instance. So if you enter into a contract or an agreement, there is a foundation, a deterministic foundation as to what would be an effect if a specific cause would take place. For instance, a breach of contract. This explains the usage of law in the history of civilization very briefly. In summary, anarcho-capitalism attempts to remove tyranny by replacing it with even greater tyranny. Violence dictated by the marketplace. The end.